All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Bible Hangout. I am Reverend SherriDeniseJames. I am Senior Minister for Understanding Principles Church, and this is our Thursday night Bible study. Can't get this camera right, but hey, we'll go with it. All right. Now it's really crooked. Anyway, this is our Thursday night Bible study, and we are in the midst of a series right now based on the Reverend Dr. Mary and Tompkins' book, A Student's Guide to the Hebrew Scriptures. And I was reflecting today on the start of the Bible Hangout, that it literally was, I was teaching on Sundays at Up Church and really had just run out of time for the material that I had put together. And so the students that were in the class agreed to meet online, and simultaneous to that, I had learned about this thing called a Google Hangout. And there was a young woman, I cannot even remember her name, but she's a musician. I think her name is Daria, D-A-R-I-A. Anyway, she had built this community online around her music, and she would actually compose music like online, like while she's, playing for her audience. Someone might take their computer and turn their computer towards the sky or whatever, but they might be in Budapest, right? She's in America. And she would incorporate what she was seeing through the eyes of her audience into her music. And I thought that was so cool. And so I thought, well, what if I called it the Bible Hangout? Now, mind you, it started and it was like the online metaphysical Bible Hangout. It was a whole lot. It wasn't just the Bible Hangout, the online metaphysical Bible Hangout. And then over time, it got shortened to just the Bible Hangout. But it's really, this is a place where you come to grow in your understanding of the scriptures. I study metaphysical Bible interpretation. And right now we're in the study just to see what the scriptures actually say, because before you can metaphysically interpret them, you actually need to know like what's on the page. And so that's what we're doing right now. So I want to take a moment to just say a prayer for this class, and then we'll get right into the lesson. So right where you are, if you would just center yourself. And what I mean by that is just to begin to slow down and take a deep breath. We know that there is always a transformation available, and we have to slow ourselves down, come out and come apart from the world, and become available for the flow of spirit. That the universe, God, Spirit, is completely at rest and completely at peace. And in order to tap into that energy, we must slow down. Spirit, we are available. We are available for what tonight holds for us. We are open for growth, expansion, abundance, and all the good things of spirit. Bring that up through us to us right now, and let us be changed at the center of our being. In the name and nature of the one that we call the Christ, I affirm that this is so, and so it is. Amen. Okay, so we are actually still technically working through the book of the Kings. I told you that was a later church thing to separate it into 1st and 2nd Kings, and it actually is one collection of writings that spans hundreds of years. I hope that you have seen that. It spans hundreds of years. It goes all the way from the turnover of the kingdom from Saul to David, all the way up to the dissolution of the kingdom, and then the destruction of the kingdom, first Israel by Assyria, and then Judah by Babylon. So it is a wide, we're talking several hundred years time span that the kings are covered. But this is Israel when it is under the rule of a monarchy. And so part of the tension that's happening is that they had moved from a people that were governed by the covenant that was given to Moses at Mount Sinai. Scholars refer to it as a Sinaitic covenant to the covenant that was given to David as pronounced by the prophet Nathan, and what is called the Davidic covenant. And so what we talked about last week is this tension between the Davidic covenant and the Sinaitic covenant, that essentially with having a king, it puts a person in between Israel and God, whereas before there was no intermediary. And one of the things that comes about is this idea of sin, that sin is, definitely there were individual sins, but the sin that matters is the sin of the king, because it's the sin of the king that essentially can get the people ejected from the land by God. And the most grievous sin is idolatry. Now, again, just to catch you up to where we were from last week. So when they come into the promised land, they are a bunch of tribes, 12 tribes that sometimes get along, but most times don't get along. And so there arose a series of judges, men and women, and they arose for a purpose and then receded into the background. So they didn't necessarily serve as a judge, and judge not in the way that we think about it in modern day America. Judge meaning that they were a military hero or a military leader. And so they arose to deal with an issue, and then they receded into the background. So somebody like Gideon, you've heard of Gideon's 300, or someone like Samson, he arose to deal with the issue of the Philistines. So no judge ruled for life or led the people for life. Then you have prophets that begin to arise. And remember how they get compared to Moses, but the people begin to call for a king. And Samuel says, no, I don't think you guys want a king. And they're like, no. All these other nations have a king. So we want to be like these other nations. And so they press him, and he chooses Saul. I think he chooses Saul probably because he can manipulate Saul, but Saul also is a hothead, and he's got some mental illness issues, and he's jealous, and he's all kinds of things. And so he's like a hot dog, kind of goes off on his own, does his own thing. And so Saul completes a sacrifice and is basically repudiated by Samuel, because only the prophet or only the priest could do the sacrifice. So Saul does the sacrifice. He doesn't wait for Samuel, and Samuel denounces him. And then he goes to the house of Jesse and chooses David from among the I believe 7 or 8 sons of Jesse. And then there is this long season where David never really asserts himself as king. He just continues because he has a relationship with the royal family. He and Jonathan, Saul's son, are best friends. And so he never, when he has the opportunity to take Saul's life, he doesn't. And he remains this example of what it means to be a good king. When Saul dies, David takes the kingship and he captures the city of Jebush, of which Jerusalem is the capital, and he moves the capital of the country he unites the tribes, and then he captures Jebush, and then he moves the capital of the country to Jerusalem and makes plans to build a temple in Jerusalem. The temple doesn't get built under David, but he is considered like the paradigm of what it is to be a king in Israel. And as we've seen last week, every king that arises from the house of David since his reign, since his time, is compared to David. So there's this how does he measure up? It would be like, Johnny Coleman, right? So we had Johnny Coleman in the UFBL, and then every minister, every leader then inside of the UFBL gets compared to Johnny Coleman, because she becomes the paradigm of what ministry looks like. So under Solomon, who succeeds David, Solomon is not chosen by God. Solomon is chosen by David, his father. And David on his deathbed tells Solomon, listen, establish your kingdom firmly. In other words, kill everybody. Anybody that's a pretender to the throne, kill him. And Solomon obliges. And basically his rule is firmly established. Solomon is extremely ambitious, wise, but extremely ambitious. And he goes on this major building spree, but he also has wives, foreign wives. And we'll see from later with the historian who puts together this, what the scholars call the Deuteronomistic historian, meaning this school of thought, that this Yahweh only school of thought that seems to be asserted by the Deuteronomists, or the school of it doesn't mean like a school the way that we would think of a school today, but it's like a school of thought, like a group of a type of thought that's predominant in an area, and it's the thought that survives and ends up in our Bible. This Yahweh only belief system. Solomon has a lot of wives, and you'll see later that the dissolution of the kingdom is blamed on his, not just the foreign wives, but that he allowed them to, when he married them, they got to keep their religion. They didn't have to convert and become followers of Yahweh. And remember, the sin of the king, and the worst sin, is always idolatry, which is putting another god or worshiping another god before Yahweh. When Solomon dies, his son Rehoboam ascends to the throne, and Solomon did what was called a corvée, which was forced labor on state projects. So the people wanted some reprieve from that, and they come to Rehoboam and they say, "Look, we need you to kind of let up because this was really rough under your dad." And Rehoboam doubles down on what is, on the corvée, basically the forced labor. And the 10 tribes break away and form the northern kingdom, and they hold on to the name Israel. So after the dissolution of the kingdom, the northern part of the country, the 10 northern tribes carry the name Israel. Samaria becomes the capital of Israel, and Jeroboam, who is the leader, he has to figure out a way to give them a national identity. And because what happened is that when Solomon builds a temple, he puts the temple in Jerusalem, and the temple is actually inside the king's court. So, and then there's the rule is that you can only worship God in the temple. So Jeroboam had a real dilemma on his hand, and his solution was to erect 2 golden calves, one in Dan to the north and one in Bethel to the south. And later you'll see in this today that it is that the Deuteronomistic historian who put together kings, right? And we're not saying that it was one person, it could have been a collection of people, but the point of view of this historic voice is that it is that idolatry, the erection of the golden calves in Dan and Bethel, that basically lay the groundwork for their destruction under the Assyrian Empire. And so that's where we are. I just want to get you guys caught up with where we were last week. We talked a little bit about Elijah and Elisha. And tonight I want to talk about the Assyrian crisis, because Assyria was effectively the superpower of the day. And they would be the equivalent of an America, or during the Cold War, a Russia. They were the country that everyone fears. Maybe today that country might be China, perhaps. But the Assyrian crisis, so that it was chronicled in the chapters 11 through 17 in 2 Kings, 11 through 17. And let me know if there are any questions on anything that I shared. If anything that wasn't clear, please let me know. I'm watching the chat. All right. So the problems of the Ahab dynasty spilled over into Judah. And I'm going to butcher this name, Athaliah, who's from the line of Ahab, she usurped the throne in Jerusalem and attempted to wipe out the dynasty of David. Now, if you remember from a couple of weeks ago, we said that the Davidic covenant establishes the house of David forever. The Davidic covenant that given to David by God establishes the house of David forever. So by her usurping the throne and trying to wipe out that dynasty, it just speaks to that everybody wasn't in agreement with the house of David being the ruling royal family of the country. She was the only ruling queen in Israel or Judah. Okay, so what happens in chapters 11 through 15 is that there's this bouncing back and forth between Judah and Israel. And remember what we said last week, that what you'll see is that that there was a way that the writer or the historian or group of writers, it doesn't have to be a single person, but the way that this writer lines up the kings, and what you're looking at is that they'll name the king of Judah, they'll give like how they had a whole nomenclature. They would name the king of Judah. They would give the date, the age that the king was when he comes to the throne. They would and they would give it relative to who was king in Israel. So it would be like saying, President Barack Obama came to power, and Justin Trudeau is the prime minister of Canada. Like, it's always given in relation to some other country. We don't really have that kind of world here, but if we did have a split in the country, it would be like, this person came to power while this person was in power in the other side of the country. So that you're getting this juxtaposition between Judah and Israel. Judah being the southern kingdom, Israel being the northern kingdom. 10 tribes, 2 tribes. 10 tribes, 2 tribes. Okay. They give the age at which he came to the throne, and then they always give a value judgment of the king relative to David, who was the standard of comparison. Now, when they introduced the kings of Israel, they took a different pattern. They would tell you, who it was that came to the throne, who was in power in Judah, the location of the capital city of Israel, because that was a moving target, and the length of the reign. And they would give a negative evaluation of the king. Because again, the writer has a very negative view of Israel, because Israel erects those golden calves in Dan and Bethel. And so they're always, it's almost like they're foreshadowing the fall of Israel. So bouncing back and forth between Judah and Israel in chapters 11 through 15, they're tracing the careers between Joash, Jehoahaz, Jehoash, Amaziah, Jeroboam II, who is from Israel. It's either Uzziah or Uzziah, or sometimes known as Azariah, who is the king of Judah. And so these years, remember, we're in BCE, so the years count backwards. So for example, Joash starts in 837 BCE, and he rules for 37 years, and then leaves the throne in the year 800. And then he's succeeded by Amaziah in Judah, who rules for 27 years, from the year 800 to the year 783. And then Amaziah is followed by Uzziah, who rules from 783 to 742. And Jehoahaz rules from 815 to 801, so about 14 years. Jehoash follows him from 801 to about 786. And then Jeroboam II comes in from 786 to 746, so about 40 years. So that's what you're watching. And it's like going back and forth, tracing their careers according to that pattern that I shared with you earlier. And so following in quick succession, the last kings of Israel, Zechariah, Shallum, Menahem, Pekahiah, and Pekah, they cover really only a few years, from 746 to 732. So it's kind of some rapid changes in there, which is about 14 years. And around that time, Judah was pretty stable. They had one king during that same time when Israel was changing kings with 5 different kings. Jotham was the ruler or the king of Judah from 742 to 735. So he was roughly contemporaneous with these kings that are like coming in and out almost one a year, or one every 2 years. Let me know if there are any questions to any of this. The fall of the northern kingdom, Israel, occurred in 722 BCE. Under the leadership of King Hoshea, Israel revolted against Assyria. So part of what happened is that Assyria is a superpower, and they come in and they say, you got to submit to us, and you got to pay tribute to us. Basically, they're extorting money from the country under the threat of destruction. They're extorting money from the country under the threat of destruction. And so King Hoshea leads his people in a revolt against Assyria. It's like, no, we're not paying the money. We have a modern day equivalent of that with, not paying the money, but with the extortion with Haiti and France. And I think many of you know this history, and forgive me if I butcher any part of it, but I'm just trying to draw a parallel. But Haiti paid restitution to France for enslaving Haiti. But essentially, they had to buy their freedom. And I believe the last payment was made in the early 2000s, late 1990s. But basically, and this is about a little country. And then, there are all kinds of things that were done to like flood the economy so that the people couldn't earn money. But they basically made restitution to France in exchange for their freedom. So very much in that, there's really nothing new under the sun. We're watching a lot of the same things repeat themselves. But Israel decides not to pay the tribute. Israel decides not to pay the tribute. And what happened was that King Hoshea, although he's advised against it, he goes and he makes a deal with Egypt. And so he thinks that this deal with Egypt is going to hold. And so that's why he was willing to take a chance. And he is, the writer, the historian excoriates him for it in the text. But when he refuses to pay the tribute, or the country refuses to pay the tribute to Assyria, Assyria comes and crushes them, and Egypt stands by and lets it happen. So it would be, part of what gives present day Israel some of its chutzpah is that it's backed by the United States. So there's a lot of moves that that country can make because it has the protection of the U.S. And, while we are, heavily indebted to China and other countries, we still have one of the biggest and best trained militaries. So a lot of why someone wouldn't want to, mess with the U.S. is because of the military power that we have at this point. But it would be like, Israel really isn't in this position, but if it were in a tribute position, and then it came and made a deal with the U.S. and said, hey, I want you guys to basically have our back. I'm gonna stop paying this money to so and so. Or Haiti. Haiti's a great example because nobody was on Haiti's side. Haiti, if they decided they weren't going to pay that money to France, I mean, they're right off the coast of the U.S., so it would be close enough off the coast of the U.S., but it would be like them coming to the U.S., making a deal with the U.S. president or U.S. embassy or U.S. government or whomever, and then not paying that money to France. Now, France and the U.S. are allies, but they make a deal with the U.S., and then they don't pay that money to France, and France comes in and just attacks. And the expectation is, hey, U.S., we formed an alliance. I promised you this, you promised me that, and you guys are basically letting us die on the vine here. So that's essentially what happens to Israel, is that they make a deal with Egypt, and Egypt betrays them. The Assyrian king Shalmaneser attacked Samaria. He died during battle, and his successor, Sargon II, finished the job. The Assyrian king Shalmaneser, that's what goes in that blank, attacked Samaria. Samaria was the capital city of Israel. Attacked Samaria, and he died during the battle, and his successor, Sargon II, finished the job. According to the annals, he deported 27,290 Israelites into Persia and repopulated Israel with colonists from Babylonia, Elam, and Syria. According to that, he deported 27,290 Israelites. something Reverend Mary always used to say, and it always stayed with me. She said, you always know a people by the way that they conquer. You always know a people by the way that they conquer. You know that the Romans killed Jesus because it was crucifixion. So it's a false narrative to say that the Jews, they may have supported it, but to say that the Jews killed Jesus, because if Jews killed Jesus, he would have been stoned to death. And the way that Assyria conquered is that they would come into the country that they were conquering, and they would essentially relocate all the people. So it would be like, I mean, this isn't quite the same, but you know, it destabilizes the country, because I mean, if you think about how upsetting it is for you to move, and you moving under free will, or maybe you're, you know, moving under duress, but you're moving under free will, you get a new house and you're going into that new house, and moving is a big deal. It is upsetting to your life. So imagine an entire country of people relocated. We don't even know where. We don't even know where. We don't have any understanding of where they might have been relocated. There are no surviving writings. It's why they're called the lost tribes of Israel. These 10 tribes were relocated to who knows where. I mean, geographically it may have been near Israel, but we don't know. And there's no surviving writing. So we don't know if the people regrouped. Probably not, because there are no surviving writings. We don't know what happened to the people. It devastated the country. It devastated the country, and they are lost to the pages of history. And then what they did, so that you couldn't come back, is that they brought in people from other countries, from Babylonia, from Elam, and from Syria, and they repopulated Israel with all of these other people. So part of years later, I guess maybe the sting of that is gone, and maybe the compassion for it is gone, but there were some people that were left. It wasn't everybody that was gone, but it was enough that it devastated the country. But there were people who were left who still had some of the old traditions that then got mixed in with the traditions of Babylonia, Elam, and Syria. And so the people from Samaria were considered half-breeds because they intermarried. They grew up, all their kinsmen, a good number of their kinsmen, or most of them, are gone. They started intermarrying with the Babylonians and the Elamites and the Syrians, and having these mixed children, right? Because that's what happens when you ain't nobody there. You gonna marry somebody. Somebody's gonna have a baby, and so they end up intermarrying, and so they retain a portion of the traditions from the ancient Hebrew religion, but it's been mixed in with all the stuff that they picked up from these different groups that have been resettled there. And so the Samaritans were looked down on. And so the significance then of Jesus making the Samaritan the hero of one of his parables is extremely revolutionary, because these people were considered half-breeds. They were not respected. The idea that they would be the hero in a story, and not the priest, not the Levite, not the one that's the chosen by Moses, that the priest would come through the house of Levi. That's huge. That's major. So just to give you a little bit of context of him making that choice, and what it would mean for him to make the hero the Samaritan, and to say that the Samaritan is who is good, and the Levi and the priest is who is not. Now, the remaining chapters in 2 Kings, chapters 18 through 20, they form a record of the reigns and events of Judah down to its destruction over 100 years later. So essentially by chapter 17, Israel essentially is gone. Israel is demolished. And so then the last chapters chronicle the next 150, about 150, maybe 200, little under 200 years, where Judah still stands. And so Assyria comes right to the doorstep of Judah, and they actually put them in a vassal relationship where Judah has to pay tribute to Assyria. But they handle it differently. They don't go off and make a deal with Egypt, who clearly demonstrated that they couldn't be trusted. And they end up standing for another 100 or so years. Hezekiah, I'm at the top of 59. Hezekiah was one of the best kings based on his piety and his religious reforms. So it was something I wanted to share with you about Hezekiah that I had. Because part of what happens with Hezekiah is that he is, instead of making a deal and making a deal with Egypt or with whomever he thought could protect him, he actually goes to God and prays about it. And so the historian is very kind to Hezekiah and praises him for his piety, for his religious reforms. And basically, kings were judged good for a few reasons. So like a king who permitted a sacrifice only at the Jerusalem temple is praised no matter what mistakes he made. Conversely, one who does not insist on sacrifices only being made at the Jerusalem temple is condemned no matter what accomplishments he has. And so Hezekiah is someone that is in that Yahweh only tradition, and also because he goes and relies on his relationship with God. And so he is opposed to making a deal with whoever, some outside force that he thinks can protect him. And so he is viewed very favorably in history by the writer or the redactor, the editor of Second of Kings. During Hezekiah's reign, the Assyrian Empire kept the pressure on Judah. Instead of seeking outside military help, Hezekiah brought the matter to God. His actions stand as a model for the appropriate response in the time of national crisis. That basically, when everything is falling apart, greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. When everything is falling apart, you don't go run trying to make a deal with whoever you think has the power. God has the power. So you go to God for what it is that you need. And then God chooses the channel. So essentially, who was it? King Hoshea. By King Hoshea going to Egypt and making the deal with Egypt, it is as if he's trying to choose a channel through which he wants God to bless the country. And God chooses the channel. This is true in your own life. This is just kind of step outside this lesson. This is true in your own life. It is when you try to choose the channel through which your good is going to come that you go awry. God chooses the channel. And so King Hezekiah demonstrates that for us, because he goes to God and he lets God work out the battle. He lets God work out how he is going to protect Judah. The message of the prophet Isaiah, that's what goes in that blank. The message of the prophet Isaiah had a profound influence on Hezekiah. The message of the prophet Isaiah, and we'll see that because we're going to come back to this when we get to the book of Isaiah. The message of the prophet Isaiah had a profound influence on Hezekiah. After David, Josiah, who ruled from 640 to 609, he was the best king Judah ever had. What happens is that in 622 BCE, Josiah authorized and underwrote the restoration of the temple back to Yahwistic purposes after its disgraceful neglect under Manasseh and Ammon. So what happens with Manasseh is that he's considered extraordinarily wicked because he turned the temple into a pagan temple, and he reigned for a very long time. He is not looked at very favorably at all. But Josiah, when he comes to power, he's actually 8 years old. And so he's a child. And so whoever was teaching him clearly was someone that was a Yahweh only prophet. And as the story goes, the king was just extremely distraught. Uh-oh. Oh, man. Okay, so I'm at the bottom of 59. One of my cards is off. Oh, there it is. Okay. So essentially what happens is that during the process of renovation of the temple, Hilkiah, the high priest, came into the possession of the book of the Torah. This book is thought to be Deuteronomy. Hilkiah gave it to Josiah's secretary, Shaphan, who in turn read it to the king. So the reason that Josiah is praised and considered second in terms of a king behind David is because he is the one that restores the Yahwistic purposes for the temple, making the temple Yahweh only. And remember, a king that permits sacrifice and treats the temple as Yahweh only is praised. It don't matter what mistakes they make. One who does not is condemned, no matter what accomplishments they have. So Manasseh is viewed in that light because he turns the temple into a pagan temple, that he allows all kinds of other sacrifices in the temple besides sacrifices just to Yahweh. Oh, Malayla says, mostly when I hear about Hezekiah, it's bad stuff, but this changes my perspective. Mm-hmm. The king was extremely distraught when he heard the words that seemed to spell doom for the nation because of their apparent departure from the covenant. We're not talking about the Davidic covenant. We're talking about the Sinaitic covenant, right? And they have strayed so far from that original covenant, of that Yahweh only covenant, and that relationship of Israel and God. And so he is extremely concerned. And so one of the things that comes about in this, let me go to the next one, is that the prophetess Huldah interpreted the book to Josiah. So Josiah gets it, his secretary reads it, and then they go to this woman to basically canonize the scripture, the prophetess Huldah, and she interprets the book to Josiah and the court, and she comforts him with the prophecy that he would not see the demise of the nation because of his own faithful acts. So the Deuteronomists, there's this theme of delayed punishment. For example, the way that the Deuteronomist historian paints Solomon, he has many wives, that the punishment is deferred until after his death and at the time of his son's reign. And then you have the split of the kingdom. So the split of the kingdom is blamed on Solomon having these foreign wives and allowing these foreign religions to come into the country. But there is this idea of delayed punishment. For example, Israel's defeat by the Assyrians is deferred punishment for the sins of Jeroboam, who erected the golden calves at Dan and Bethel. This is a sin for which the nation is punished almost 200 years later. You'll see this in the scriptures that the blame for Israel falling to the Assyrians is blamed on Jeroboam, but Jeroboam reigned 200 years ago. It would be like, well, we do it today. We blame the things that are happening in the country for choices made back in the 1800s, 1700s, the way that the country was set up and stuff like that. We blame the conditions of, African, enslaved Africans that were brought here, blame that on the conditions of slavery and the destruction that it did to the family and all of that. So this is not a new thing. There's this idea of delayed punishment. And so it is the Deuteronomistic historian that continues this theme of delayed punishment, where something is set in motion, and it could be set in motion hundreds of years ago, but it doesn't play out until modern day as far as the story is concerned. It doesn't play out until modern day. Josiah made further reforms throughout Judah and the territory to the north that Judah controlled. Josiah made further reforms. That's what goes in that blank, further reforms. And so there were three things that helped him to be judged as a good king. He took down the golden calf, so the various religious shrines to Baal, to Asherah, to the astral deities, and numerous other abominations to Yahweh. They were all torn down. Again, the book is found during the restoration of the temple after Manasseh and Amon reigned, and he realizes that, oh crap, we're going to be in trouble, and so he institutes all these reforms. He renews the feast of the Passover, and he makes Jerusalem the only place of worship. So he restores this practice of you can only come to Jerusalem to worship God. There's no such thing as worshiping God in your house or worshiping God on the hill or any place else. You got to come to the temple if you want to worship God. Josiah was actually 8 years old. He is the grandson of Manasseh. In the Deuteronomist view, Josiah is a very good king, but the sin of Manasseh is so great, it had to be punished. And what the prophetess tells Josiah is that God plans to bring evil on Judah for the sins, but it's going to be after Josiah's lifetime as a form of mercy to him. So again, we get this theme of delayed punishment. So now we're going to talk about the fall of Jerusalem, and this is found in chapters 24 and 25 of the book of 2 Kings. The Assyrian capital of Nineveh fell to the Babylonians in 612 BCE. The Assyrian capital of Nineveh fell to the Babylonians in the year 612 BCE. So Judah was paying tribute to Assyria. Babylon conquers Assyria. Now Judah owes tribute to Babylon. It would be the equivalent of Puerto Rico is a protectorate of the United States. China decides to call in its debt, all the debt that we owe to China. All these countries that are supposedly protectorates of the United States now have a new relationship with China. Just make this make sense. So when Nineveh, the capital city, falls, when the Babylonians conquer the Assyrians, now Judah has to deal with Babylon as opposed to Assyria. And Zedekiah, who reigned from 598 till about 487, was installed as king in Jerusalem with the understanding that he would promote loyalty to the Babylonian overlords. Basically, you good as long as you honor who we are. So that would be like, again, using that scenario, China goes to Puerto Rico and it's like, hey, listen, you weren't a state of the US anyway, but provided that you promote loyalty to the Chinese government and you guys become a communist nation under our rule, you good. We good. We all, it's all, you know, peace, love, and hair grease. Well, Zedekiah rebels. he couldn't help himself. So when he later rebelled, Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon, he returned to Jerusalem to force compliance. And Jerusalem is completely destroyed after an 18-month siege. And I mean, like, so what's left today is the Wailing Wall. That's it. The king's court is gone. The temple is gone. Ain't nothing left but the Wailing Wall. If you have ever been to Israel, go to the Wailing Wall. That's what the Wailing Wall is about. It's about lamenting the destruction of the temple in 586 BCE. That is all that is standing today. It's a pretty tall wall, by the way. I was there when I was 17. It's so interesting because I had all these interesting trips long before I was ever in ministry. And I was, you know, I had got this trip to Israel, and I went through all these different areas of the country that now have a whole different meaning to me now that I have this training that I have now. But anyway, the Wailing Wall is what's left. Babylon destroyed the temple. They just knocked it all down. Okay. Especially traumatic was the total destruction of the temple. And the temple that was the focus of Judah's religious life was now gone. Was now gone is what goes there. That got left off. Especially traumatic was the total destruction of the temple. The focus of Judah's religious life was now gone. King Zedekiah was blinded, and he was taken into chains, into exile with his court, and only the poor are left behind. So remember what I said before, you know a people by the way that they conquer. The Assyrians removed the people from the country and resettled them somewhere else. Babylon conquered differently. What they would do is that they would come in and take out all the doers in the country, all the leaders, all the dreamers, they basically left all the lazy folk in the country. And they took the leaders and they put them in service to the Babylonian government. And so they actually lived some measure of wealth, albeit under Babylonian rule. And some measure of freedom under Babylonian rule. So they weren't slaves in a traditional sense. They had freedom to come and go. They couldn't go back and rebuild Israel, but they had freedom somewhat to come and go. And so they're put in service to the government. So the reason I'm telling you this, because we're going to get to this later when we get to the book of Daniel. This is why Daniel, these stories are so important, because they are the heroes of the faith. They are the doers, the leaders in the country who had to work and forced to work in service to the Babylonian government, but who refused to give up their Yahweh only practices. And so you have Daniel under threat of being thrown in the lion's den, who holds on to his spiritual practice and says, listen, if God don't save me, God is still God. And he's willing to risk it all. This is what makes him a hero, is that even after they have been relocated from their homeland and forced to work in the government, that they maintain their Yahweh only practices. The same thing with Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. The king puts on this music and basically says, I want you to bow down to, when you hear this music. And they refuse. They don't pretend to bow down. They refuse, period, to bow down. And again, they're heroes because they're in a foreign land. They don't have permission to live in their homeland. They don't have the temple that they're able to worship at anymore. They have got to find a way to continue worshiping God even in that circumstance, and they refuse to be broken. And so they are the heroes of the faith. So I want that information to land with you so that when we get to them, you have a context for why it matters. Not just that it's an inspiring story and that God's going to save you, but why in the Hebrew mind it matters. Because they held up the faith practice when there was no temple. And by the way, traditionally, when a people were conquered, it was believed that the God of those people was greater than the God of these other people. And so the people who were conquered would turn and worship the God of the people who conquered them, because their God is greater. And the Judeans who were carted off into captivity, into the Babylonian exile, what's called the Babylonian exile, that were carted off out of the country, they make a decision not to worship the God of the Babylonians. That was a very revolutionary thing. There is a great PBS documentary that you can find on Amazon and PBS, but you can find it on Amazon. And I think it's called it's a whole series. They got a bunch of documentary series that they've done in one vein. And it's The Great Civilizations. I just can't remember what this one is called. Yeah, I'm blanking on the exact name of it, but it is a really good history, and I recommend you watch it, because, and I'll put it in the show notes if you're watching this back on YouTube or on Facebook. I'll put it in the show notes so you'll be able to find that documentary. But what's powerful about it is that the people, when they were put in exile in Babylon, they didn't decide to worship the God of Babylon. That was amazing. I'm trying to think what would be. I can't think of a modern day equivalent to give you, but to stress like how revolutionary it is for them to decide to continue worshiping Yahweh. Because basically they're saying Yahweh didn't fail us, we failed Yahweh. And so they begin to interpret actions in the country to show how they broke the covenant with God. And that's why they're in the Babylonian exile, or why the temple was destroyed and they no longer have their homeland, as opposed to the God of Babylon is greater. That was a major departure from the going collective thought. Maybe the equivalent would be, Christopher Columbus making the choice to sail, and a good portion of the world believing that the world was flat, and risking sailing off the side of the earth in the minds of a lot of people in order to sail, in order to I'm gonna go test it. I'm gonna be the one to go to the edge and see if it's possible to fall off. Like, it's that drastic as far as like shifting a world view. And because gods were local, you had the God of Texas, the God of Arkansas, the God of Houston, the God of Dallas, gods were local to the land, and they were land-based in the sense that you could walk outside their territory. and so for them to make this decision, it was an unusual choice to make, because there was nothing else like it. And they made the decision to continue worshiping Yahweh and not let that go. And it is that worship that really changed the course of history, because our master teacher, Jesus the Christ, comes out of that tradition. Any questions? All right, all of this is just clear. Y'all just got this.
We got it.
Uh-oh. Clarice, are you speaking?
I said we got it.
You got it. Good. Anybody else? Anybody? Any questions? Anything that's not clear? Any aha moments? Anything that surprised you? BJ says, not clear at all, but yes, I got it. What's not clear, VJ?
What's not clear?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was trying to write you a note before you even asked that.
Okay.
I've heard this information before.
Yes.
But in my lifetime, this is the first time I see the need, the desire, the want for it to make sense. And it's going to take me some time to digest this. So, yeah, I got it, but it's not all clear. I got to think about this.
Got it. Okay, good. Hopefully, that curiosity is awakened in everyone else to know this history. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? All right, thank you guys so much for tonight. Next week, we turn the page and we're going to start talking about the Hebrew prophets. So we're going to talk about the role of the prophets, and we will probably get through the prophet Hosea. Yeah, we'll probably get through the prophet Hosea. So page 62 to 66. So we'll go as far as we can, because I want to kind of take my time with that. But thank you guys so much for tonight. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Thank you. Good night.